Welcome to Access Europe for the first meeting in 2025, and as you know, we decided to delay by a week so you could all celebrate New Year without also feeling obliged to turn up here. Anyway, today we have, I'm very glad to say, it's taken me 3 years to get him, but we've got Philipp Stiefel, who is an former MVP from Germany. He was an MVP for many years and still is one of the most knowledgeable experts in Access and related applications. His website, I'm sure many of you will be familiar with, Code Cabinet, is available in both German and English. He has his own YouTube channel, also called Code Cabinet, and has a number of VBA tutorials, various types of commercial software, including Ivercy and a Find and Replace tool. And he's also an active participant and presenter at both DevCon and AEK. That's enough rambling from me. Over to Philippe. If you would like to share your screen, Philippe, and welcome. I'm glad we finally got you here.
Thank you, Colin, for this very, very friendly introduction. And I will share my screen in a second. I just have one thing to add. You already mentioned Ivercy and the Find and Replace tool. And I want to add something there because it's directly related to our topic today. Both of these tools are COM add-ins, and they are built with the methodology and the approach that I'm going to show today. So it's not like a pie in the sky theoretical stuff that I'm presenting here, but it is actually implemented and used by thousands of Access users around the globe. And with that being said, I will move on to my presentation here and switch off video and share my screen. Okay, yeah, the important bits are already set, so let's dive in here. The first question we should ask ourselves is, why use add-ins? What is our benefit? And the clear focus of Access COM add-ins, and by that I mean COM add-ins built for Microsoft Access, is that they can provide additional functionality for the development environment. And that development environment is key here. These are features that are for you as developers. Usually you will not use and deploy COM add-ins to your users. That does make rather little sense for Microsoft Access. And why would you enhance your development environment using COM add-ins? That core reason is you have powerful programming tools you can use to create these COM add-ins. That was actually one of the reasons why Ivercy is a COM add-in, because it uses an API that is somewhat special and cannot be used with the standard declare syntax in VBA. So a different approach, a different development environment was required for that. And this also allows to seamlessly integrate into the Access user interface for development. Another benefit of add-ins is that they can also integrate into other Office applications, and I hope I will have time later to discuss this in more detail. I will skip over that for now and rather ask the question, what is COM? Well, the easy answer is it's a component object model, but that doesn't really answer your question. So the more comprehensible, important bit is it's a binary interface standard. And binary here means it applies to compiled objects like classes in a DLL or in an executable file. And these have to adhere to the COM standard, and then they can be used by COM. And COM is a technology that is built into Windows. It is programming language independent, so you can use basically any programming environment that can create COM-compatible components like Visual Basic.NET, C++, C#, Pascal, and the new kid on the block, Twin Basic, is also capable of creating COM add-ins. And if you still got an old copy of VB6, that was also capable of creating COM add-ins, but I'm not suggesting that you use this old software because it's not able to build 64-bit applications. But in theory, if you only target the 32-bit platform, then it is also possible to use that. And that is something to keep in mind. You need to compile the stuff to DLL and EXE, so VBA cannot be used to create COM add-ins. And another important bit of COM in general is it is the basis for the object libraries we use in Access and VBA development. So whenever you add any DLL or OCX or something to the references in the VBA environment, whatever you add there, it must be COM compliant. That is basically the interface standard that is all relevant for these reference libraries. And if we look at the VBA object browser, then we already see an interface. And I deliberately selected object here like iPictureDisp. The capital I at the beginning really denotes an interface, but in the end, every class from an object library you see in the object browser is a COM interface. Even if it is a class, it has a corresponding COM interface that makes it accessible to other languages like VBA and usable from there. And the interface is basically what you see on the right-hand side, members of iPictureDisp, handle height, HPAL, type, width, render. These comprise the COM interface, including the arguments you see at the bottom line for the render method, the HDC as long, and all these other arguments that follow there. They are basically parts of the COM interface here. So, what is the difference between an interface and a class? The interface defines method signatures. What I showed just with the render method, the method and its arguments, these are what are defined in the COM interface. There is no functionality defined in the interface. It's just the signature of the method. And to implement this, you will need a class that will basically do the work, but its methods must comply to the methods of the COM interface. And now we are going to see the first demo, and a quick question.
No questions yet, Philip.
I'm going to start with the demo now, but please can you type in the chat, did you already use interfaces and implemented interfaces in VBA? And I will look at that later because I'm interested in that, but for now I will show you how this is done. So I already prepared an interface here, and I said the convention, it's just a convention, is to start interface names with a capital I. So this IConference thing here is an interface. And on the right-hand side with the methods here, you see that is already what I told you. The interface has no implementation. It's just defining the methods, but the methods essentially do nothing because it's not the interface's job to do something beyond defining the interface to communicate with that class. And the only code in here is this down here, and that is just a fallback for me to prevent people from instantiating this class, because that's not supposed to happen essentially. So I defined an online conference class, and this is implementing this interface already. But I also created an in-person conference class that we are going to use now to implement the interface. And the real important keyword here is implements, and you probably have not used it if you don't know about interfaces. And now I say implement IConference. And now I tell the VBA compiler and the runtime, this class is implementing the interface. And just adding this single line here makes IConference appear here in the drop-down of objects in the context of this class. And if I select that, the VBA environment will give me stub methods here. And I will quickly select all of these here, because if I tell the VBA environment, yeah, this class implements that interface, I must implement all of these. I will quickly cut one out and say debug compile, and now this tells us the object module needs to implement speakers for the interface IConference. So if I put that back in and compile again, now it does work. So what I do need for implementation is that I implement these methods. And the important bit here is the prefix. This is the name of the interface the method belongs to, and this is the method name as it was defined in the interface. And there's an underscore separating the two, and you must adhere to this naming convention to implement the interface. And you see here the VBA environment just added RHS as a name for the argument. That is not really relevant. We could change that to irrelevant. It will still work. It doesn't really make a difference what the name is, but it must be a string. That is quite important here. I will just quickly implement all the stuff here. I hope I don't make a mistake in a hurry.
RHS doesn't exist anymore, Philippe.
Pardon?
You've changed it to irrelevant. Remember,
No.
this
is a new method, and it has also the RHS argument here.
My bad, apologies.
No worries, and you're really encouraged. If you don't understand anything that I show here, then ask right away and I'll try to clarify. If you got a broader question that's not really directly to things I talk here, you're very welcome to ask that later. So I quickly compile that. That does work. And now I'm going to use the interface, and I declare a variable. And the important bit here is I declare as IConference, as the interface. And now when I create an instance, I will create an instance of that class. And it's not really important which one I take here. I will swap that in a second. So we've got a conference. It has a name. It has a date, which is January 7th, no 8th. 25, and it has some speakers. Colin is a speaker because he organizes this thing, and I'm a speaker as well. And now we can call a method here, and you see the argument type here is defined as IConference. So I pass in my conference object and I save and run this code. And this is unfortunate. Why? We need to enable the content. Got no idea why it wasn't. And back to our code that I just wrote, and you see the announcement of the conference is just a stupid message box, but it tells people who see it when the conference is and who the speakers are. And the important bit here is, and I can now, because the conference variable is of type IConference, I can just swap out the class here from an in-person conference to an online conference, and I can run the very same code, and it will also display this announcement of the conference. And this is an approach to swap out functionality. You can, like the announce conference method, I'm going to show that here, that is totally agnostic of what type of conference it is. It just knows it is an IConference type that supports this interface. And as long as I adhere to the interface standard, I can pass any object I like. It just must implement this interface. So this is how interfaces work in VBA. And these are COM interfaces. They are slightly neutered because you can only use them within VBA and they are not publicly exposed to other development environments in Windows. But the basic functionality is COM add-ins. So Neil asked the iConference module. Yes, of course, you can see that again. And I will also zoom in. And the important bit here is, as I said, defining the methods. It's not about functionality. You define how other code can interact with a class that implements the interface. And C asked, you are confused about the class initialize. I go back to my demo code, I never instantiate the interface. If I would try that, it would in theory work in VBA, but I deliberately raise the error here. This is my raise error here that tells me you cannot instantiate this. That's not how this is supposed to be used. And this is just basically a hint for developers in the sense of you're making a terrible mistake here and that is not supposed how things are going to work. And because it cannot end well if you continue here, we raise an error and tell you to do something else. And that is the point why I now need to use like the in-person conference class that implements the interface as the instance of the object here. Now let's go back to the presentation. Let's continue with a quick disambiguation. In the further progress of this presentation, if I use the term interface, I am referring to a technical strict interface. And I got a bit of a dilemma because the Office add-in system is also some sort of interface, but a more general, wider thingy. And to make it clearer to you what I'm talking about, I will use the term connectivity if I refer to the Office add-in interface system, because that is, as we will see in a minute, much more, not really vague, but there are lots of options to do things, and if you don't do it that way, you can alternate to that way, and so on. It's a more soft definition of an interface, and so I will call this connectivity. What are add-ins or plugins? They are compile tools, or they are basically components that extend the functionality of an application, and they are optional. The application will work out of the box without any plugin, but you can add them and they provide additional functionality. And for an add-in or plugin, the term add-in and plugin, it's really exactly the same. There's no difference in meaning. Some people prefer the term add-in, some prefer plugins. No difference there, they are synonymous. And that the requirement that they can work is that they use defined connectivity of the host application. And the host application here is primarily Microsoft Access, but it could also be Microsoft Word, Excel, or almost any other Office application. To make this concept a little bit clearer, I have a really exciting, never seen before visualization of a host application and plugins. And here comes the host application. This is German standard wall socket for electricity, and that is basically used in majority of Europe, so I still leave it in this international context here. And so this interesting host application can be connected to, or several plugins can connect to it. And this is basically the standard plugin for this host application. It can connect to the core interface that provides electricity, and it can also connect to the outer connectors, which are the ground. And this basically uses the full capacity of the interface. There are also other plugins. This one here only uses part of the connectivity, but it has a benefit. It can also be used in a couple of other European host applications which use a slightly different standard, but also conform to the core standard. And this one, maybe you have known that, that's a plugin that should work with almost every European host application except those on an island across the channel, which need to do special things all the time, but beyond that it will work everywhere in Europe. And here is another interesting plugin because that is supporting the full capacity of the host application connectivity here, but it also supports the connectivity of French host applications. I hope this makes the whole connectivity system a little bit clearer because it's in some extent really as simple as this. Let's look at classic add-ins for a very brief moment. These are the add-ins you can create with Microsoft Access itself. And the connectivity requires a name for the add-in, a file name. You need to say for what it is or where it is used. Is this a builder or a wizard, or there's a third type I forgot. What is it? And it needs a VBA function that can be called to invoke the add-in. The information about all this is stored in the Windows Registry. That's where Access is looking for add-ins and for the information like the file name and VBA function name to invoke the add-in. When you create one, you will write this info in the user's reg info table, but when you install it, Access will write this information to the registry, and that is where it has to be. The user's reg info table is just a helper for you to easily provide the information. In the end, it only matters whether this information is in the Windows Registry. One important bit to notice here is these classic add-ins are only loaded when you first use them. If you got them registered, run Access, and never use functionality from the add-in, it will never be used. But if you trigger a function in the add-in, then it will be loaded and the Access add-in and its functionality will be run. If we compare this to COM add-ins, the connectivity is similar but different in an important regard. It also must have a name and a file name, but the important bit is it needs to have a class. And this class needs to implement the COM interface IDT extensibility 2. This is the core connectivity between the host application and the COM add-in. And you also need to specify when the add-in should be loaded. All this information is also stored in the registry, but in a different location. And it also needs a little bit more information in the registry, but we'll come back to that in a minute. The important difference here is the add-in is loaded independently of its use. It's either loaded when Access starts automatically, or you must manually load that in. These are the two common options, and that is independent of if and when you actually want to use that in. And for you to be able to use that in, it must be loaded before. So if you frequently use it, it's convenient to have it run automatically. If it's an add-in that you only very, very rarely use, you could load that manually before you want to use it, but that's really uncommon, I'd say. In the registry, you first must register the COM class. And this goes to HKCU software classes prog ID. That is, the prog ID is basically what you need to create a COM object. If you write in VBA, create object access.application, the access.application part, that is the prog ID. And you also must register a class ID, and that goes into the class ID section of that registry branch. And that is a GUID, basically, that uniquely identifies your class. That is the default if you have a 64-bit COM class on 64-bit Windows or 32-bit class on 32-bit Windows. If you have what we commonly use, a 32-bit application on 64-bit Windows, you must be aware that these registry settings go one level deeper in the WOW6432 node, and then below that is the class ID. But the prog ID stays at the top level in both cases. These are the registry settings just for the COM class. To register the add-in for Access, to tell Access, here's an add-in that you can use, you must add additional settings in HKCU software Microsoft Office Access add-ins. So I just told you these settings should go into HK current user, and that is what I would recommend. And the core reason why I recommend this approach is because then no administrator permissions are required on Windows to register the COM class and to register the add-in. And this has the effect that it is only registered for the current user. So if I log into Windows, register an add-in, I can do that, I can use that in, but if I log off and Colin would log on to the very same computer, he could not use the add-in before he himself also registers it. You can write the same information to the HK local machines branch in the registry, and that will then be registered for all users. But this, of course, requires administrator permissions on Windows, and that is already a horrible drawback because it's in corporate environments, it's a pain to get someone with admin permission to register stuff there. But for me, there's also another problem that I'm really not recommending using the HK local machine stuff, because then the administrator defines whether the add-in is loaded automatically or not, and the user cannot change this. And that can be a real pain if you have problems with an add-in and don't want it to load, or you want it, disable it for some time for troubleshooting or whatever. It is a pain, and a simple user cannot change that. So I recommend using the HK current user part. Okay, this slide should not be here because I cannot show this demo due to time constraints, but I've got a slide here that boils down the essence of this. What I frequently do to register the COM add-ins is using a simple batch script. That is a .bat or .cmd file that I run with cmd-exe to execute it, and that can write to the registry, and that will add the required information to the registry. And the first bit is writing here the prog ID, and I will quickly step over that because you just should know that the information should go in there. and the variables at the top, they contain information. And this example shows AEK 2023 because I originally created the presentation for that conference, but I revised it all except this screenshot because it was a pain to do with all those colored boxes and I didn't want to redo it all just for changing the name. So here is basically all that is needed to register a .NET COM add-in. With a different programming language, you would need only about 1/3 to half of these settings, because many of these here are for the .NET compatibility, basically, like the assembly name, assembly files. Here is an important bit. I use the rec32/ at the end to write to the 32-bit section of the registry. And finally, I also define the .NET version that should be used to run that add-in. And that's also specific to .NET. And the part you see now is just for registering the COM class. The tiny bit at the bottom is to register the COM add-in for Access, but as it also depends on the prog ID there, you must basically have done the longer bit before so that this can work in the end. And here is what I talked about. You need a friendly name for that add-in and a description, but the real important bit here is the load behavior. We'll come back to that in a minute. You just should keep in mind this is written to the registry. Here is just the result of running that script I just showed you in screenshots in regedit. That is basically what then ends up in the registry. Now back to the load behavior. This is not the complete but a simplified list of options, but I think these are the most important ones and I can't remember having ever used any of the other available options. You can say, yeah, basically this add-in is not loaded at all, or for the value 3, load automatically on startup, and that should be the most common. And you can also say it should be loaded manually, and there's another option, I guess that is meant to show it once to the user automatically. You do a splash screen like you've got a super duper new powerful add-in install. Do you want to run this every time or not? And then the user can decide, yeah, I want to run this automatically every time. Or if he doesn't explicitly interact with the add-in to change the load behavior, then it will automatically be set to load only manually. Now we look at the COM interface here for IDT Extensibility 2. That would be the corresponding bit to my IConference interface, which I showed you earlier in VBA. It has 5 methods that must be implemented, and these methods work a little bit like callbacks. Essentially, they work like callbacks. Access will try to load the COM class that is implementing, Access was told that it is implementing this COM interface, and it will try to call these methods. And the class in your COM add-in must implement these methods. And I highlighted the 2 most important ones that are on connection and on disconnection. And these will be called when the add-in is loaded or unloaded on disconnection. These are really, really important. The other ones, not so much, but they must be also implemented for the COM interface to be complete. Okay, it's time for another demo. And now I think we get really to the meat of the topic here. This is Visual Studio because I create my COM add-ins in VB.NET. And you will see some stuff you now know from my VBA example earlier. The implements keyword says this class is called connect. and it implements the extensibility.IDT extensibility2 interface. It also must have an prog ID. That's what I mentioned earlier. That is here AUG EU2025 COM add-in demo 1. That would be equal to access.application. In theory, you could use and create object and use this term to create the object. And it also must have an GUID to uniquely identify this COM class. If we look at the methods here, you see one very welcome difference than before. I created a method access is terminating. And if you paid attention to the COM methods, that was not one of them, but I used this name for my method. But in .NET, I can define explicitly which of the interface methods should be implemented here. And this is, of course, the on, begin, shutdown, and that was on my list earlier of the methods you need to implement. This means in other development environment, you are more flexible, you can use your own method names and you are not tied to that interface name underscore method name syntax that is mandatory in VBA. Here I can basically use any name I want. I only must specify the interface method I want to implement. And all the methods will just show a message box unless I said they don't. And the important bit is down here. I mentioned before, on connection is the really most important method of that interface. And I get the host application here. That is essential because that will be an access.application object that is passed into my COM interface here. And of course, I need this instance to do stuff in my COM add-in interacting with access. And now I've got here this method open info form and I pass in the application object that I got through this method call. And we quickly look at this. It's just opening a form and it will then invoke this display database info. And once again, I get this application object that is once again the access application. And what I just do, I pick this application object and use the current data and say, okay, in all tables, I add all the tables, in all queries, I add all query names, and go on doing the same for all forms, all reports, all macros, all modules. That is reading all the information from your Access database. And then here I will show that in the UI, it will become clearer. I will just invoke a couple of these methods and it's just do cmd open table, do cmd open query, open form, and we also we always use design view because this is meant as a tool for developers. So this is the add-in code in VB as it is now. I built this solution that is basically compiling the code to a DLL. It doesn't do much because it's already up to date. And now comes the bit that I told you before about registering it, and I will go to the build output folder. So you got the DLL here, that is the important bit. The DLL contains the COM class and is basically the COM add-in. And now I need to run the script. I will run this one. I show it quickly to you, but this is except for the changed prog ID and changed GUID, it's basically what I showed you in the slide a couple of minutes ago. And it will register all that stuff. And 8, I saw your question, it will become clearer later. Partially in a second, but in total later. So I run this script. You may have seen a quick black box flashing there. That was just the command line running the script. And now I need to restart Access, and maybe I will use another Access database. But now you already see this is a message box from the add-ins. The message boxes I just showed you for all the add-in methods, and you see now the onConnection method was called. So, and this also opens hang on, I just need to remove these other message boxes. You see the other methods are invoked as well. They're just not interesting to us. So, sorry, that got down here. So this is a form from our add-in. And you see already it has recognized the application it is running in is Microsoft Access. And there is no current project, so there are no tables and no other stuff. I will open this database, which is basically my dump for experiments. If someone asks in a forum, I will open this database, and this is not the way I usually work. It is just for throwaway examples. I wouldn't care if this is deleted or not. But it has lots of content, and thus it is a good example here. Now I click reload info, and that will reload the name of the database. And if there's a database, it will fill these drop downs, and we are on the left hand side in Access, we are at forms. If I drop down here, you see sort order is slightly different, but you see these are the same forms that you see in Access. And you can scroll down here, and now I could select any of these and click the button, and this button is the one using the AC design to open the form in design mode. And now you see this is open in design. I can edit this as I would usually. It just has opened the form, and I can do my design work, and the add-in opened that form for me. It interacted with MS Access and told Access open this form, and that's what it did. And for now, I also don't know what to show here, because the possibilities are basically endless. Whatever you can do in Microsoft Access with VBA code, you can also do in the COM add-in to do the same thing from that COM add-in. And now I closed the database, and you see I also closed Access, and you now see again that these message boxes are shown here on begin shutdown and on disconnection. So you see the on begin shutdown is basically a warning to the add-in. Access will shut down soon, and now on disconnection means now the add-in is unloaded. So, and now this form will also close because it depends on the add-in. Okay, let's continue. We have some extended connectivity to look at. This is basically what we implemented now. We've got the core functionality, but we have a possibility to do even more here. And that's what we will do. We will take care of the Access ribbon. And for an COM add-in to support the ribbon, we would need to implement yet another COM interface, and that is called IRibbonExtensibility. You probably have seen that because it's in the MS Office library, and you will also see it in VBA, although you cannot do much with it there. And it has a method GetCustomUI, and this method is supposed to return valid ribbon XML. That's essentially the very same ribbon XML that you would use if you create your custom ribbon in Microsoft Access directly. The XML standard that is used here must be exactly the same. And the ribbon callbacks, they will just be invoked, as you probably know from creating your custom ribbon, and they will just use call by name resolution of the methods that are used there. Okay, now for the demo. And I close this. We are back at the very same class of our interface. It's the class connect that I showed you previously. It implements this IDT extensibility interface. And now to support the ribbon, I need to implement another class, and is Microsoft Office Core. And that is basically the office.dll library, but there's just a .NET wrapper around that. Therefore, the name is slightly different, but it's essentially what you see in that DLL if you look at it in the VBA Object Explorer. And I said we need to implement the IRibbonExtensibility interface. And now I already get that blue curly underline because I told the VBA environment, not the VBA, the Visual Studio environment, I want to implement this, but the method that needs to be implemented is missing, but I prepared that already. That is the GetCustomUI method that I just mentioned on the slide. And I now activated it, and it does nothing then to return the ribbon XML, and we can take a very quick look. This is just a method that loads a manifest stream from the file. That's basically an embedded resource in that file. And the name of the resource is this one, AEU35, and the date is wrong, my mistake. But that is the namespace, and the resource is RibbonXML, and that is basically this file over here. I will increase the size a bit. That's familiar to you if you already created a ribbon. It's just the very same ribbon XML that you would use for your custom ribbon in Access. So I just load this XML from my DLL where it is embedded, and then I will just, in the GetCustomUI method, I will just return this ribbon XML to Access. And now I need to rebuild my solution for this to have an effect. And now I can run Access again. And you see these are the message boxes, and it also shows this form again, but we're not really interested in that. Oh, of course, hang on a second. I think this will be the cause of the problem. Yeah, I commented on it and didn't really think through. Hang on a second. I hope it will run right away. It's now. Yeah. Here it is. That is the ribbon that I wanted to show you. So here are buttons. They don't do much except showing message boxes, but they kind of reflect which button was clicked. And so you can basically do anything you like when clicking on buttons. And of course, you're not limited to buttons. You can use any ribbon control you like in here. That is just a quick selection.
You could all recover from an error as fast as that. Well done, you.
Okay, let's go to the finish. I'd like to talk a quick bit about late binding and references. For inside your add-in, you must definitely reference the IDT extensibility library and the Office library for the ribbon, if you want to use the ribbon, because to implement interfaces, the development environment must know which interfaces these are exactly, and that only works if you add a strong reference to the types. You can, everything else that you do, like the Microsoft Access interaction, that can be done basically with late binding. The add-in application object that I showed you earlier, which I use to enumerate all forms, all queries and that stuff, that is done by late binding. And that's just fine. And if you are creating an COM add-in for Access and you want to add some references, you should think about which do I actually need. Do I need the Access library because I want to interact with the Access application, or need I use to DAO because I want to interact with the database, or maybe I want to use ADO. And you should think about that before what you do actually need, before adding unnecessary references you're not really need. To integrate the Office DLL or Access DLL in .NET. This is .NET specific. You will not have to deal with that if you use a different development environment. You need a COM wrapper, a primary interop assembly that basically makes the COM library available in .NET with all functionality. And Visual Studio includes the extensibility library and the Office DLL. If you need the individual applications like the Access or Word DLL, you would need to download VSTO. That also includes that. And the last version of VSTO I looked at, it was 2013. I assume, but I don't know for sure, that the newer versions of VSTO will include the libraries, the primary interop assemblies for newer versions of Office. If you can't find them, you can simply build your own COM interop assemblies with TLB imp. That is a tool to create assemblies for .NET from COM libraries. And you must use that if you have third-party COM components or your own COM components you want to use in that COM add-in. Then you need in .NET. This is only limited to .NET. You need to create your assembly, the interop assembly for that. So just 3 small tips. In Visual Studio, there is the menu Debug, and it has an option attach to process. You can use that to attach to a running instance of Microsoft Access that is running your COM add-in, and then you can use the debugger to step into the running code and debug that step by step. And it's quite helpful to use message boxes, as I did to present you with the event, to make the event visible to you. Using these message boxes is quite convenient for debugging as well, because otherwise it's difficult to put breakpoints into the code. And so the message boxes can be quite helpful for that. If you use the attach to process functionality and then Access is crashing, then you should disable all other add-ins first and only focus on your own add-in that you created and try to debug that. And that usually will resolve these crashes that might sometimes happen. I have a super quick demo. I will do it. I quickly show you another script, and the really important bit here is that we are now in Office Word add-ins. It is the very same add-in. I don't need the COM register stuff before, because that also was done. I run this, that's running so quick, even I didn't see that. And now I run Microsoft Word. And you see a familiar message box and a couple of message boxes. And you will also see my form here. And you see it has detected the host application is now Microsoft Word. And the very same add-in is basically compatible to Microsoft Word regarding the loading of the add-in into Word. Of course, all the other stuff here in the add-in, this stuff here, that is not going to work in Word because Word does not have a database, it has not tables, queries, forms, and so on. It cannot work. But the loading of the add-in works without changing a single line of code. Okay, we close down Word and And we have one final slide, and that is essentially the question slide. So, Maria, I've seen your question. The slides will be available after the presentation. I'm not sure yet whether I will make the demo applications available, but the slides will be definitely there.
Do you want to go skim through the questions, Philip? You've been monitoring them as well, I think, but shall I skim through them for you?
If you kind of did a pre-selection of the questions and you answered some already, then it would be convenient if you tell me the questions.
Okay, right. Neil asked, when does the OnStartComplete fire? In other words, in this context, what does complete mean?
It means that Microsoft Access or any other Office applications is done with starting up. Because at the very first time that you get any interaction with the host application, Access, for example, it might not be ready to interact with. And so that OnStartComplete is important if you want to tell the host application, like open a form in design or load a database or so. If you do that before startup was completed, you might get some weird error that you cannot invoke the method at this time or so, because you are interacting with Microsoft Access at an earlier time than you usually would if you just use Access for development. And so that might be important if you want to automatically do stuff with Access in your add-in.
So is that after it has actually loaded your database, run its auto execs macros and so on, or is it just when Access is loaded but before it loads your database?
To be really sure of that, I need to close Access and open it again.
It's before the database is loaded.
I think so.
And that's true for all the COM apps, right? It's right when the COM app loads is when that code is executed. So it's long before you open a Word document or before you open an Excel spreadsheet or before you open an Access database.
Yeah, exactly. It's just telling you the application is ready. And on screen here is OnStartComplete. And there is, you see in the background, there's still the list of files I could open, but I did not open any database yet.
But what about, sorry, but this isn't clear yet. Neil asked about AutoExec, or when you sometimes have a form that opens automatically. It's not clear yet whether it comes in before that.
It's before. AutoExec is when the database is opened, is when AutoExec executes.
Yeah, but if you have if you say you double click a database, so you're opening Access, but also going into that database straight away.
But Access loads first, then it completes, then AutoExec runs.
Thank you. That's what I thought you were saying, but I wanted to be absolutely clear. Thank you.
Yeah,
no problem.
And unfortunately, there is no real information about when a database is loaded in Access. With other Office applications like Word or Excel, you get an event like a document opened or something. I don't know how it's named exactly, but there is such an event that you will know when Word opened a Word document. But a similar thing is missing from Access. So you can only just try, is there a current database or is current database nothing? And you have to probe yourself whether a database is open in Access. There's no event when a database is opened, unfortunately, because that would be very useful for some scenarios.
Thank you, Philip. Question from me. I'm sorry if it's a dumb question. One of the commands was used just before Access shut down, and I'm not sure whether it was actually, I've forgotten whether it was shutting down Access or just warning you as it was about to shut down. If the add-in is shutting down Access, does it do so nicely or force a shutdown?
If the add-in is supposed to shut down Access, you can use the application quit method, which would be a clean shutdown, and that should be what you usually will do. But of course, you could also do some nasty stuff with terminating the application using the API, but I wouldn't recommend that. And if you do application quit, it's a clean close. And for clarification, these methods I show you, they are kind of like events. They are informative for the add-in. Microsoft Access is telling the add-in, dear add-in, I want to let you know I am about to shut down. That is just the information, but the actual initiation of the shutdown process was done elsewhere.
But Tim asked if you've any experience in using Twin Basic to write COM add-ins.
No, actually, I have not used Twin Basic at all yet.
Tim?
But I'm very keen on doing that. I just didn't have the time for it yet.
Tim, have you done so? If you've got a chance to turn your microphone on. While I'm waiting for Tim possibly to respond, Geoff asked the question that I was going to ask. Can you explain, in nice simple words, that's my words here, what benefit there is in using a COM add-in compared to standard Access add-ins, apart from obviously being able to use them across Office?
Yeah, one benefit I mentioned already, you can use entirely different programming environments like VB.NET. So you will have compiled code that runs much faster if it has to do really compute heavy work. That is one reason. The other reason is you have different possibilities, much more possibilities of programming in these other applications. As I mentioned, for Ivercy, we need to use the MsgCCI API from Microsoft, and that's basically like the Windows API, but it uses a different calling convention. And there's no way you can do that with VBA at all. So you would need to use a different programming environment that supports that.
Tim, have you got a chance to answer?
The simple answer is no, but I'm very intrigued. I've been reading a lot about it, and I know that some of the other Twin Basic programmers out there have been doing exactly this with it. So it'll be very interesting.
Right, well, if you can find out more, I think it would be an excellent follow-on from somebody for a future meeting. I'm very conscious it's 7:15 and we need to allow John a chance to talk about next month. Geoff, you've got your microphone on, so if you say your bit, and then if anyone else wants to speak, please put your microphone on and wait for me to call you. Geoff.
I was just going to say that you can always just call a .NET or COM DLL from an ACDA file. I don't think you really have to go through all the process to create an add-in just to be able to do that either. So I'm really curious as to really what people think the benefits of COM add-ins are over the ACDA file, and that was really my question. So I think we're okay. I think I have my answers.
Okay, thanks. Are there any final questions for Philippe before we thank him for what was an outstanding presentation? I think I can speak for everyone, Philippe, and say not only will we all benefit from your slides, which will be available, but I would very, very much appreciate if you could give at least one and hopefully more than one of the demos for us to play with as well, just to kickstart us. This has helped a lot to get me going, and I'm sure other people would benefit from a demo if you could make them available. But thank you ever so much.
You're very welcome, and thank you for inviting me, Colin.
Thank you. I will try and get you back again before another 3 years.
I will stay here. If people have questions later, I will be available, but now I shut up for a moment to let Colin do his announcements.
Thank you ever so much. Right, we'll come back to you. Thank you again for what was an amazing presentation, Philip. And I've still got the PowerPoint there. So for those who want to download the materials when they become available, go to either my website, AEU35, or the official Access Europe website, for the Access User Groups website, just a little bit more difficult to navigate that site. Right, next month we have a fellow UK developer from Scotland, John Mallinson, who is going to be talking about his own add-in for Access, and this is a VBE add-in well, it's not in the style of MZ Tools, but that will give you an idea of where we're coming from. It's called VBE Extras, and I've tried it and it is very good indeed, but I've only scratched the surface of what it can do. John, if you could tell us a little bit about next month, we'd be very grateful. And by the way, the website to learn more there, and the details are on the screen at the same time. John.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me, Colin?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, thanks for the intro. Yeah, so I'll be talking about VBE Extras next month. It is a COM add-in. A lot of the stuff that Philip was talking about today was relevant to VBE Extras. The fundamental difference, though, is that it is a COM add-in that is active within the VBE itself. The VBA development environment. It's not an add-in for specifically Access or Excel or Word. It works in the VBE, whichever Office application or VBA enabled application that you're using. The point of VBA Extras is to make writing VBA code quicker and simpler. It adds a lot of functionality to the VBE, so trying to give it much of the functionality you would see from a sort of modern development environment, such as Visual Studio, which you saw on screen earlier when Philip flipped across to that. So a lot of the functionality you would see in a modern development environment is what I'm trying to replicate. Colin, you mentioned about MZ Tools. In some ways, it's very similar to MZ Tools because MZ Tools is also a COM add-in for the VBE. But the functionality, the crossover between the two is quite light. There's a post on my website, which you may have seen, Colin, as a result of one of your queries, which I worked out what the amount of similar functionality is. It's around about 10-12% that is similar between the two tools. So what I'll be doing next month is showing, doing a demonstration of some of the functionality. There's actually around 70 different functions and commands that VBE Extras provides. So I'll not be going through all of those, but some of those that I will include the ability to clear the immediate window, also to scroll to the start and end of the immediate window. And you can do that from menu items. You can choose to do it yourself, or it will also do it when code starts to run. It will list all the declarations in an active procedure, or in a module, or in the entire project, and optionally show you a list of those and let you jump to any one of them that you want. Having selected a declaration, it'll also show all the references of that declaration, and again, show you a list of those and allow you to jump to any of those particular references. I'll also be demonstrating highlighting. VBE Extras provides a function so you can highlight all of the on-screen references of a particular declaration, so you can quickly identify where they all are on screen. It provides functions such as renaming code, both the declaration and all references of that declaration. One of the key functions is cursor history tracking. So when you move about your when you move around your project, all of the code, VBE Extras tracks where your cursor is, where you've made edits and where you view code. So if you want to move back to where you were before, you can track back through your history. And if you've tracked back through your history and you want to move forward again, you can do that as well. Some other functions I'll go through is themes, which is a much quicker and simpler way of changing the font and colors, etc. in the code pane and immediate window. It provides a full screen mode. So if you're used to Visual Studio, you can do a single key press and it jumps into a full screen mode. VBE Extras does that in the VBE. I'll be demonstrating my improved add references dialog. So the VBE provides a very small dialog that you've got to manually scroll through. VBE Extras provides one where you can search and filter for different type libraries or DLLs that you want to add, and also stores your favorites as well, so you can add them with just a couple of clicks. I'll also demonstrate show all members. So we'll all be familiar with the very tiny yellow dialog that's shown with about 6 or 7 lines in it when you press a dot following an object or member, and it shows you the members that you can choose from. VBE Extras provides an enhanced version of that you can use to filter and select different types of members. Shows you any doc strings that are available, etc. So I'll demonstrate that. One thing that was interesting from today's presentation, Philip mentioned about implementing and extracting interfaces. VBE Extras provides functions to implement interfaces into a class or to extract an interface from an existing class. So a lot of the work that Philip showed on screen where he was manually adding stub methods, VBE Extras will do all that for you. That's it really, Colin. Just to say that if anyone wants to try VBE Extras, it's available on the website now, comes with a 60-day free trial, full functionality. If people are interested, they can go and check it out now.
Brilliant. You're a star. Thank you ever so much, John. We're looking forward to that tremendously. And the continuity between this month and next month, of course, was well planned in advance by me. I wish. So thank you to John. Thank you to Philippe. Philippe, is there anything else that you would like to add?
One more thing that I forgot to mention, if you build an add-in for Word or Excel or something like these applications, that might actually be something that might be beneficial to your users. For example, if you have built an Access database and you want to allow your users to create Word documents and want to provide them with the ability to fetch data from that Access database to insert that into the Word document, that might be a use case for creating a COM add-in for Word that will allow the user to query your database, not really like a query tool, but with an UI where the user say, enter our footer for a letter or enter the address of customer 123 or whatever. And that is something I would have liked to mention in context with Word and the benefit of creating COM add-ins for other Office applications.
You know, I think we might be inviting you back to give a further talk later this year, Philippe, if I can persuade you to do that. Next month, anyway, Wednesday the 5th of February, back to the first Wednesday of the month. And just because I've got a slide for it already, I'll just try and move on to the March presentation, Wednesday the 5th of March. And I don't know how many of you will know of Alexander Denz. He's given talks for AEK, and he might be giving a talk at DevCon this year as well, and he will be talking about his AI assistant. As you know, for good or for bad, we don't have Copilot in Access. Alexander has created something that brings you the best of both worlds, your knowledge together with the sometimes flawed AI knowledge that is gleaned from all over the place there. So that's the March talk, and then we've got things planned up until June at the moment, and I'm starting to look for talks for the second half this year as well. Thank you everybody for turning up.